So then, we are back with the more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzaielic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end. As per Yirmiyahu the prophet, we find a layer of understanding of the spring feast, autumn feast, and the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. So then, during this time, after 09, we have realized then there was a time of 1,000 years of deceit, where you can understand when you read Revelation, or then known as gelah, where you read then 1,000 years granted for the Messiah. He was born as the king, and then up to 1009, then his kingship was then obviously exercised during this time on the earth. Then afterwards, after 1009 until 2009, was then 1,000 years of Nahashatan, facet of deceit. During this time, then after 09 and prior of 32, there is a period of the restoration and also the autumn feast. So then, per the original manuscripts, we find then each of those areas delineated very precisely, where then each of the events of this restoration period is found on recordings of the prophet Yirmiyahu. Then not only this, but we find sections in Daniel, Ezekiel, and then understandably during this time after 09 until prior of the autumn feast, or the sounding of the shofars and the pouring of the cups, known as vengeance. We find ourselves then understanding the dragon, the time of the dragon. So then later when we read the Messiah explaining then the 20th chapter of gelah or Revelation, then you find a section of it related with the dragon, a section related with deceit, a section of it related with the destroyer. The destroyer was active during the time of the 1,000 years of the reign of the Messiah until 1009. Then we find ourselves understanding then the time of the dragon, where then Dubai has already the physical area of the dragon. Cancun has the physical area of the dragon. Obviously the South Pacific and Australia at some point, they will understand the importance of a distribution center or then a trading post of the South Pacific. So as then South America, so as India, so as also Canada, because of the northern route, and then South Africa, and maybe others, as many as the dragon thinks would be then proper for his system. Not only this, but then September in the Soviet Union comes then the G20, where then the conversations of the BRICS banking system must be then completed. Thus then the dragon not only has his physical areas or geographical areas around the world, but also then via the internet, where then later every system, every website, every transaction must be linked with the dragon. So then when we read gelah or Revelation the 20th chapter, then we understand the facet of Nahashatan as dragon throughout the world. At this point we are yet during the first transitional time, from the seat to the dragon. And then comes later a second transition, where then the Ishmaelites receive their stick of authority of trade, as it started Ishmael as the king. Ishmael was a king. He was a king because the prophet Yirmiyahu mentioned in the 62nd chapter of Yirmiyahu, known as Isaiah for some reason, then you find then the people of the desert, the Ishmaelites, then using turbans. Hebrews, they do not use turbans, they use veil. So then the 62nd chapter is for the Ishmaelites, restoring then the royalty of the teachings of Ishmael, and he started as the king. Then we find tabernacling is the second stick of authority related with Ezekiel 37th chapter. Then we understand tabernacling, the first tabernacling on the land of Cush, northern Sudan. Then you find, obviously, when you read Revelation, the first chapters, you find the 7 cities on Asia Minor. Those cities must be refurbished, because then obviously the autumn feast or the vengeance, they are involved with those 7 cities. You can understand 7 shofars, 7 cities, a sound per city. These must be studied further, because people must understand those cities must be refurbished. So then during this time where the dragon then is making his presence very known in this world, it is imperative for nations thinking of the dragon mart. It is the system of the dragon where people can refurbish themselves after 1,000 years of a joke. The time of the seat was a joke. Not because the Creator gave 1,000 years of a joke, but because the outcome from the people without the holy cities was absolutely a failure. Not because of the Creator, but because of the inability of the people of making the system to work. And it didn't. And the Creator knew at the end of the 1,000 years of the seat, the world would be in trouble. And the world is in trouble. And the only solution is get in line with the dragon, understanding the dragon mart, so then nations can retrieve and rebuild and becoming a worthy partner, where then we find ourselves doing trade with the dragon. Then later comes the dragon online. People then do investments, they can do purchases, they can make purchases, they can then send gifts and receive gifts and purchases and parcels. Then we understand when the Messiah speaks of the freighters of the earth. Very important. Freighters are given us then the understanding of the apex of activity during the time where the Messiah saw the ships related with Revelation or gelah. You find a section of it where he was explaining then freighters everywhere on the earth. It's because the system of the dragon was implemented. So nations could then refurbish themselves and being part of the prophecy of Yeshayahu, the 61st chapter. Because the holy cities are mentioned, and then the very city where the Yeshayahu was making mention of, then the Gentiles were included. Tabernacling is the very center of the universe, because tabernacling is the Creator. And then when you read the Gentiles then doing the work of the land in the perimeter of the service area of the holy cities, indicates the inclusion of the Gentiles. Because if you understand, tabernacling by itself, they were always maintained by Hebrews. Gentiles sometimes were included amongst the people, but this time Yeshayahu mentions not the Hebrews taking care of the land, but he makes a reference of Gentiles taking charge of this section while in line with the instructions. So then as long as the Gentiles understand the plan of Dragon Mart, understanding their tasks, and then retrieving and rebuilding, then they work themselves for their own benefit. If they go against it, then works chaos against them. It balances itself always, because there is a divine hand behind. So then we find ourselves, understandably, in the South Pacific, for instance, lots of islands around. They are mining. They are trying to get their numbers. They are trying then to get more trade with other countries. And then the Dragon Mart provides them with those proper actions or then proper work ethics where then they can become part of it. Receiving their parcels, becoming then later computerized, and then having more trade, having more parcels, having more then ships around, and including tourism. So then we find ourselves understanding step by step what the Messiah was explaining during his visions, where then he explained the future. And then the second transitional time then relates with the stick of the Ishmaelites, where then they receive the trade authority because of the crude, petroleum. Then they began to make their showings and their indications of how then trade should be then exercised. China yet becomes the factory, but then there is a shift later in the future where then you find the Ishmaelites being restored because of Yeshayahu or Isaiah the 62nd chapter. Thus then the stick of authority is given, and when it is an apex of the combination of China and factoring, and then absolutely working the flow of the instructions, then the Ishmaelites received their stick and they are contributing for this time of trade. Then the Messiah spoke. The Messiah spoke from a very privileged golden time, and then he explained very precisely what went on. So then, since we understand the Messiah and what he was saying from a point in the future, spoken in the past, many centuries ago, yet as fresh as if it was done yesterday, we simply retrieve from what the Messiah has said in the future, and we make the proper adjustments so then we can line up ourselves with the plan. It's kind of obvious. Because the Creator is loving, and He's very understanding, and He wants the best for the world. However, we must make our own decisions. Either we do what the instructions is then directing us, or if we don't, whatsoever decision we make come against us. Every time. And the example is Israel. Every time they went against the holy instructions, they were always busted. There was no exception. Every time a prophet came around and prophesied and Israel did not do, they got the worst of it. Every time, no exception. So this time where the world has roughly 20 years left, when we read, for instance, Luke, the Gentile Luke, you find the Messiah making a comparison with the time of Noah and the time of Lot. Then the Messiah warned, because people of the world, they do not have the proper layerings of understanding of the instructions, then they believed a fable as spoken by Shaliach Shaul. They would believe a fable or a false Messiah, then they would concoct for themselves teachers of their own liking, and then they would be absolutely oblivious of the fact of the truth. And the calculation is the Messiah was born in 4999 per the Creator's calendar, and he was placed on a pole 5032. If you combine these with the 2,000 years, 2 days, 2 Yom creation days, where the Messiah spent with the Samaritans, while he was then on the top of Mount Gerizim, the Mount of Favor. There he transfigured himself, indicating tabernacling had gone out of Jerusalem and became then a beacon of truth and light for the Gentiles via the teachings of Moshe. So then, understandably, the Messiah then indicated what is important, so then we can line up ourselves and then being in line with him. So then, very important, Dragon Mart is extremely important, so people they can rebuild themselves as per the instructions of Yeshayahu the prophet. There is absolutely no way of going around it. And since the time is very short, there are sections of Yeshayahu, sections of Daniel, sections of Ezekiel, sections of Zechariah, those must be absolutely completed. The Messiah said not a layer of understanding from the instructions will to be left undone. He did not say characters of the Torah. He did not say words of the Torah. He did not say writings of the Torah. He said the layers of understanding of prophetic. Those layers from generation upon generation, tracing back to Leviticus, the 23rd chapter, where then you understand prophecy, times and seasons. Each of those layers must be completed. And the completion of the layer of our time relates with tabernacling, the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. Yeshayahu spoke of it. Then Daniel spoke of the Gentiles during this period of the dragon, period of precision. That's why then Daniel said very precisely, at the end of the 1,000 years of the seat would be roughly 08, where then there was a peak of knowledge. Then from a tradesperson as Daniel was, then came 09, was the end then of the 1,000 years of deceit. We've entered the time of the dragon. Then is precision from then on. Computers, computerized systems, computerized trade, and then a virtual system decentralizing. The decentralization of the monetary system worldwide is imperative because removes the government's grasp upon the leadership of the people. Each person must be directly related with the dragon via the computer. It doesn't mean that people are going to worship the dragon. It doesn't mean that the dragon is going to become a church. It doesn't mean the dragon is becoming tabernacling. It does not mean those. Simply there is a reference of then gelah, the 20th chapter, where then the dragon rules the world of the Gentiles while respecting the rebuilding spoken of by Yeshayahu the prophet. It's a simple understanding of ownership of the system because of the sinful condition of this planet. The dragon must be recognized, and no transaction is done outside of the knowledge of the dragon. He must be informed every time, real time. That's why computers are established. So then when we read later in gelah, the 20th chapter, you find and the dragon. Then we understand what Daniel said. Precision, trade, every transaction must be monitored. Then is time of the dragon. Decentralization of every banking system. The dragon has his own banking. So then we understand whatsoever Yeshayahu and the other prophets spoke, it is absolutely true. They are layered properly. There is a way of reading it. There is a way of interpreting, always from the understanding of tabernacling. If we do this, then we get the benefits from. Whatsoever we do against it returns to us. Because the Messiah was very explicit. He said, as far as the judgment is coming against the instructions. Isn't it? He was explaining of those areas of the instructions. He was tabernacling in the earth. The Messiah was simply explaining, if you come against the holy instructions or the layers of understanding pre-established, then returns to you. With the same measure you use is measured back to you. When nations then they do what is against the holy instructions, the very topic where they scheme with returns to them. Because there is a perfect creator during this time doing his work. And he instructed us what we should do. So then after 09 is not what nations should be doing. Is what they should not be doing. As we understand our country, United States, we should absolutely retrieve from the world. via air, via sea, via land, in any direction you can think of, so then we can rebuild ourselves. Because the West is not mentioned on the 11th chapter of Daniel, precisely related with the time of the restoration period. So as any other nation other than the East, China, North Soviet Union, and then South Africa. Those are the designers of this time. And the rest of it we must retrieve. We do not have option. But we do have resources, so then we can rebuild our own country. As we do this, then retrieving wisely, so then we can become worthy partners, and then linking up later with the dragon. So then we can improve our own country. We are overspent. We are stretching ourselves beyond the breaking point, and for some reason our government is not yet acquainted with the holy instructions. Yet because of their ignorance, what they are scheming against the holy instructions then comes against them. So let's be very observative and understand more of the holy instructions, because if we do, we make a benefit for ourselves. And these obviously increase our perception of the importance of Dragon Mart, bringing thousands upon thousands of jobs of construction, of logistics. The logistics is very big. So then these would give us more ways of refurbishing our countries and being in line precisely as the prophets have stated it.